Hey you guys, it's Zach again. Got a review for today on the Benchmade 530. I'll go through the stats real quick, then get into my observations and opinions. The blade length is 3.25 inches, 3 1/4. The overall length is 7.42 inches. The blade thickness is 0.09 inches. Blade material is 154 cm, hardened to 58 to 61 Rockwell. The blade shape is a modified spear point. It is a flat grind on both sides with a satin finish and a partially serrated edge. The handle length is 4.17 inches and the handle thickness is 0.37 inches. The handle material is black Grivery, also known as Noril GTX 830. The weight is 1.88 ounces. It does have a pocket clip which is tip up and reversible. It is a manual knife, it is not assisted. The locking mechanism is an axis lock, proprietary to Benchmade. It is made in the USA and off Blade HQ it is $97.75 and $99 from REI. Now I'll get into my observations and opinions on this knife. Now I always go over the blade first, so this blade is technically classified as a modified spear point. In my opinion, this is a true spear point. Simply because, obviously without the serrations there, this is a symmetrical blade. The blade shape does not refer to where the edge is. So you could have a blade that isn't sharpened anywhere, and it could still be a spear point. So just having the edge on one side doesn't make it a modified spear point, in my opinion. Referring to this back edge here, it's sort of like a swedge that is so large that it has become a false edge all the way down the spine of the knife to the thumb stud and ricasso. Now this back side is not sharpened, of course, because it is a folding knife, so if it were sharpened, that would be cutting you up every time you grab the knife. However, this blade sort of does have the same affordances and the same suggestions as a OTF knife. For you new people, that stands for out the front. An out the front knife is basically a knife that looks very similar to this. It has a more or less symmetrical handle usually, and the blade just goes straight in and out of the handle, often automatically. Probably the best example of one of those would be the Microtech Halo 5. The great benefit of an OTF knife is that since the entire blade, the entire piece of metal is concealed in the handle, you can sharpen as much of it as you want to. You can sharpen the entire thing. So a lot of OTF knives are spear point blades that are symmetrical with an edge on both sides, because that's the great affordance of an OTF knife. Now this sort of has that same suggestion in its blade shape, but it doesn't actually have a sharpened edge on this side. However, there is a bit of steel at the tip that is concealed by the handle, and I'll show you this. If you guys wanted to, you totally could sharpen down to about here on the tip, and what that would give you is it would make this tip a lot more acute. It would make it a bit better for puncturing. It would make it extremely sharp. But you could sharpen this, because if you watch right there, that tip, it sinks behind the handle. So you could sharpen that and still be safe. Like even when you grab it, you're not in danger because your fingers are going to hit the handle and go up first. So if you want to, that would be a great modification to the knife, is to sharpen down to there. It'd probably be like right there-ish, and just make the tip a lot sharper. Now I want to talk about the edge geometry of this knife. You'll notice the edge is not perfectly centered. If you look at the edge right there, the distance between the terminating edge and the back of the edge is smaller than the distance over here. Over here, the edge right there is a longer bevel than the edge right there. So it isn't perfect geometry, it isn't perfect edge centering. However, it is extremely sharp. I'm not going to waste your guys' time doing paper slashing videos. Now in terms of the edge, the blade geometry, you'll notice this is sort of more of a point of fit and finish, not more of a point of structural integrity. If you look at the line going down the center where the apex is, where the two grinds meet, the line is different on either side. I can show you this right here. From the distance between the apex and the edge on the lock side is smaller than the distance between the apex and the spine, whereas on the show side, the distance between the apex and the spine is smaller than the distance between the apex and the edge. So if you look at that in a section view, then the lines of the apex on either side don't match up. I don't know if you can see that right there, but it's just a very slight difference. It definitely doesn't, hinder the structural stability of the knife in any noticeable way. However, definitely as a point of fit and finish, I think it would behoove Benchmade to really, get that perfectly lined up. Because I'm betting that this isn't just a fluke. I'm betting that there are other 530s out there with the same issue. The other thing that could hinder is the angle of the grind. I'm not sure if the angle right here is the same as it is on the other side. However, if it's different, if these apexes are at the same elevation, then that's going to hinder the edge centering and the equal distribution of resistance. Now I'm going to go over the steel. 154 cm is an incredibly popular steel. It's basically just 440 modified and enhanced. 440C steel used to be sort of like premium steel in the US, and it's still used, but mainly in budget knives. Like Buck uses 420, which is very similar, 420 high carbon in almost all of their knives. 440 is not really considered a premium steel anymore. Even this, the enhanced version, isn't considered like a premium steel or a super steel, especially when you start comparing it to exotic knives and exotic steels like Sanmai inline Damascus and 3V and 20CV and LMAX and things like that. This really just can't compare. If you look at the chemical composition of 420, basically what they did for this is they took 420 and they added a bunch of tungsten, 0.4% tungsten and 0.4% vanadium. And both of those are very prominent and very hard carbide formers. So what that does is it takes some of that 1.05% carbon and it makes some of those carbides into tungsten and vanadium carbides, rather than all of them being chromium carbides like in 440. What that does is it allows them to decrease the amount of chromium in the blade so that they still have enough free chromium for it to be stainless, but they don't have so much chromium that it's softening the steel like in 440. So 154 cm steel is going to have a lot more carbides than 440C. It's still going to be stainless, but it's going to be a lot harder. You rarely see 440C going to 61 Rockwell. That's what this is hardened to. So I thought you guys would just enjoy that bit of a rundown of the metallurgy. To my understanding, 154 cm is also a bit purer of an alloy. It has less percentage of sulfur and phosphorus in it, so that definitely helps with just basically every quality. It boosts a little bit. Edge retention, wear resistance, structural stability, things like that. Now, I believe I've already talked about Benchmade's serrations in some of my other videos, but I thought I'd cover a little bit here. There's a few things to notice about these serrations. A lot of Benchmade serrations really aren't very aggressive, and they recess back into the blade. Like I said in my original Benchmade Contigo review, I believe that's sort of partially the motivation behind that is so that when you sharpen the blade down, the serrations aren't sticking out farther than the edge, sort of like on the SEAL Team Elite. You'll notice if you look straight down the blade there, the serrations definitely come out a little bit farther than the edge, just because of how much it has been sharpened. Whereas on a Benchmade, since the serrations are recessed into the blade, that means that even when you sharpen this back, a dozen times, it's still not going to be behind the serrations. So I think that's pretty useful. Also, recessing the serrations into the blade helps to give materials something to fall into as they cut. Another thing I want to address is the maker's mark on the back here. This blade was designed by Pardue. He's a designer who works with Benchmade. He has designed the famous Griptilian. That's the knife that sort of put Benchmade on the map, and that is his maker's mark on the back right there. Now, if you look at the etching on this side, you'll notice everything on this side is contained within the blade face. That's not true for this side. You'll notice with the Benchmade logo right here, all of the Benchmade logo is on this blade face. Same with USA, same with the registered trademark. But then the numbers 530, they actually cross over the apex. Just a very small amount. It's pretty difficult to see, but you can see the bottom of the 5, the 3, and the 0 crossing over the apex. Now there's a few things wrong with this. The first being that, of course, the highest point on the blade face is going to see the most wear. So the apex and the blade flat / ricasso, those are going to see the most wear. And if there's lettering that's crossing over that apex, that means the 530 is going to get more wear than any other laser etching on the blade. So that 530 is going to probably wear down a bit faster than the Benchmade logo or the Pardue maker's mark. Now the other thing sort of wrong with this is sort of just as a point of fit and finish, it would definitely behoove Benchmade to pay attention to where to what lines their laser etching is crossing, because they totally have the space. If they just move this logo up about 1/3 of a millimeter, they totally have the space to fit all of it on there. It's just that it wasn't placed properly. Another thing you'll notice is that the Benchmade text, if you draw a line along the bottom like an underline, it's not parallel to either the blade flat or the blade apex, or the cutting edge for that matter. So it's not even lined up properly. This is obviously something that not everyone is going to notice, not everyone is going to even care about if they do notice, but just again as a point of fit and finish, definitely something to notice. Now another thing to mention about these serrations is that the line of the serrations actually isn't parallel to the apex. So if you compare the line of the apex with the back of the serrations, you'll notice it isn't parallel from that angle or from the tip. So basically the serrations here are angled like that a little bit. And what that does is when you puncture into something, as material slides along the plane edge, it's going to suddenly drop into these serrations right here, and then resistance can be gradually increasing as it goes up this back of the serration to the ricasso area. The issue with that is you're going to see very slight uneven wear on your serrations over the years. And also, again, as a point of fit and finish, it would be nice to see everything, parallel and lined up properly. Same with the blade centering, the apex centering, the edge centering. All of that is just a little bit off. Now, a lot of people, when they see this knife, they sort of go, what the heck is that little piece of metal doing there for? This piece of metal just right there, this protrusion, just sort of seems a bit awkward. And if you look at the original plain edge version, you can see where it comes from. It's basically just the back of the edge. So the plain edge version doesn't have these serrations here. The edge just comes all the way to this and it goes down, and it looks very normal. But when you have these serrations in here, it just looks sort of awkward because it goes up, there's nothing here, and then it goes right back down. It looks sort of unintentional. Looks like they just put serrations on there without really thinking through fully what each piece would look like afterwards. However, I can definitely see there being some performative benefit to this piece of metal, and that is that when material is going to be moving along these serrations, this upsweep right here is definitely going to have a lot more cutting power than the rest of these serrations by just moving forward. So it probably does make the serrations a bit more aggressive, especially considering that this part of the serration is sharpenable because it's flat. That's probably going to be the part that stays sharp and can be sharpened much more easily, whereas with the rest of these serrations, you would need a fitted rod to serrate them or resharpen them. Now I'm going to talk about this finish. This finish is listed as a satin finish, but it's pretty clear that there is a bit of stonewash in here as well. They may have thrown this in a very light stonewash for 15 minutes, because you can see those very slight scratches, just very consistently placed throughout the blade finish, sort of almost like underneath the satin. And then you can see the satin lines on top of it, especially on the ricasso. You can see those lines there. And even as you get up here, you can see the lines. Now, the satin finish isn't perfectly even. You'll notice, I don't know if you can see it very well in the camera. I might do some macros later, but right there, if you see the line, there's like sort of a line right there where beyond this point, all this satin from here and below the apex, all right here, has a very strong satin finish. Below that, the satin is, a lot more understated. It's sort of an uneven finish. And you can see that sort of in a few spots on this side as well. There's a whole lot of satin finish up here, and right here, and right here. But the rest of it is sort of, underfinished. Very, very slightly noticeable. Definitely not something to write home about. There's a little bit of it on the other side as well, but not quite as pronounced. Now another thing you'll notice about the tip is, like almost all of Benchmade's bare steel blades or satin blades, you'll notice there's very small ridges right here. I'm not sure just how well you can see them, but this should be 1080p HD. There are very small ridges, and if you run your fingernail over them, you can hear them. I don't know if you can hear that in the camera, but it is audible. Especially as the blade flat begins to curve down and taper to the point, those lines become more pronounced. Now, originally my impression was that that was a product of powder metallurgy, that in the centering, when they center a powder metallurgy blade, basically the lines are the compression as they center it, or the result of the compression. However, to my knowledge, 154 cm is not powder metallurgy. So now I'm pretty sure that since this is present in a 154 cm blade, that's just their version of stock removal, grinding the steel down in order to shape it. Now, note that it is a very accurate form of stock removal. So if you just run your hand over it, it does not feel rough at all. It's very smooth. It's only when you look really closely and see those lines, just right there along the surface of the blade, especially near the taper. Theoretically, this would very slightly increase sliding friction, but barely, if not at all. So definitely nothing to deter you from getting the knife. Now I want to show you just how thin this blade is. This blade is less than 1/10 of an inch thick. It's 0.09 inches thick. Now, a lot of people look at the ricasso right here, or look at the sort of the tang back here as well, and they sort of think, oh, that's not too thin. But you have to take into consideration that the blade flat doesn't continue. You can actually feel it when these two grinds meet. Since there is no flat between them, it is an apex that dictates that unless it is absolutely perfect, which the rest of the fit and finish on this knife isn't, then that line has to be thinner than the ricasso. and you can see and feel that it definitely is. Now, it's a very, very thin blade, and it might not be very visible as to how thin it is in the camera, so I'll give you a reference point. This is considered a thin blade. This isn't even considered a normal thickness knife. Now, clearly this is a much larger knife. This is a 3.88 inch blade. But if you look at the thickness of this knife, this is considered more or less a thin knife. Now, if you compare that to the Pardue 530, it absolutely dwarfs it. It is stunning how much thinner this blade is. And there's a reason they were able to make a blade that thin without sacrificing its structural stability. And that reason is that it has a grind on both sides, and the flat doesn't even extend past the ricasso. So, since there is no blade flat, since a vertical dimension is much stronger than a flat dimension, since the entire blade is has a vertical component, results in a much stronger blade, so they are able to make it very, very thin. And thin isn't necessarily bad. A lot of people think, oh, it's super, super thick, so that must mean it's a really nice knife, like they had the money to use a very thick stock of steel. Thin knives, by nature, make better cutters, because if you think about it, especially with a long cut, there's less steel to move through the material. So a thin stocked knife will inherently cut better on average than thicker stocked knives. However, this might not be true of this knife as much, simply because it is such a narrow profile as well. Seeing as it's much narrower, the angles are going to be a little bit steeper than if it were as broad as something like that. However, of course, being this narrow definitely helps with its puncturing ability. Now, referring to those lines, you can also see them very prominently in the curves right here, where this curves up to the ricasso and where the grind curves up to the plunge line. Now I'm going to move on to the handle. This handle is made of Grivery. It's a decent handle. It comes off initially as a very cheap material, especially for people who are used to handling G10 or carbon fiber. This comes off as a very cheap material. Blade HQ lists it as Noril GTX 830. And to my understanding, Grivery, or Grivery, depending on how you pronounce it, is basically just a different type of nylon reinforced glass, or glass reinforced nylon rather, that is a bit more flexible than Zytel. You can see it has a decent amount of flex to it. It's definitely not, glass-like rigid. It's a bit closer to a plastic. Don't be fooled by the bare steel right here. These liners are not full liners. If you can see in here, I'll do some macros later that showed a bit better, but the liners only go to about that screw right there. So all of this back here is pure Grivery. There's no metal in it at all, of course, other than the pocket clip and screws, and I'll get into that later as well. So it's definitely not going to be a super strong knife. This is not a hard use knife. This is not a survival knife. But it is something that is going to stand up to everyday tasks, because it does have partial steel liners, and it does have an axis lock. Now, the reason it has partial steel liners is sort of because an axis lock dictates it. You can't really have an axis lock without metal. If you had an axis lock with this metal bar, the stop bar, and the metal bar right here, just rubbing straight into Grivery, it would absolutely just demolish the Grivery, and the knife would fail very easily. So it must have partial steel liners to sort of act as a cage for the axis lock to function. Now you'll notice that it is an almost entirely closed back construction. There's no standoffs, so that also sort of brings a little closer in feeling to a OTF knife. Now another thing about the handle is that it is inherently symmetrical in general design, of course, disregarding that the axis lock is here and the indentation for the thumb stud right here. Other than that, it is perfectly symmetrical, which also likens it to OTF knives. It's a very good thing that they did make this symmetrical, because it definitely carries over the same design principles from the blade into the handle. The only thing that really isn't symmetrical on this blade is a result of it being a folding knife. If this were a fixed blade, or if this were an OTF knife, this could be 100% perfectly symmetrical. Referring to the liners here, another great benefit of the placement of axis locks in general is that it puts it very near the thumb ramp. So on knives like this that require partial steel liners, those steel liners can double as jimping for that thumb ramp, and it does grip pretty well. There's not much of a hand stop when you puncture into things. It lips up a little bit on both sides, and there's only jimping on one side, but it does help a bit, and it does give you a very firm purchase on the knife. Now I'm going to go over the pocket clip. I'm not a huge fan of this pocket clip. A bunch of people have sort of phallically referred to this knife as the dick clip. It doesn't really look completely like that, but they definitely could have thought that through a little bit better. I think they call it their arrow clip, and I'm not a huge fan of it. I typically enjoy Benchmade's just plain parallel clips that are rounded at the tip. I think they draw the eye much less, and they look a lot nicer. Another thing about this clip is it is black coated, and it does wear very poorly. Almost all of Benchmade's bare steel clipped blades, almost all of them wear practically unnoticeably, whereas when they black coat it, especially with this black coating, it does scrape off very easily. It's basically just a paint. I've been carrying this for about 2 weeks, and it has accumulated a whole lot of wear on that clip. I do carry it in my back pocket, so it probably does get a bit more contact with outside materials due to that, but that being said, no clip should wear that much. I mean, I've been carrying this for probably 9 or 10 times longer than this one, and you know, it's barely noticeable compared to the amount of wear on this. So I think they definitely could have done a lot better job. I don't think many people would have minded if they just put a bare steel clip on this. Now you'll notice this is a different type of clip coating than on the Benchmade 707 sequel clip. This one does keep its coating a bit better than that. I mentioned in that review that you could actually take your fingernail and scrape off the coating, which is a bit embarrassing. That being said, I think black coated pocket clips in general just wear really poorly, and they look bad pretty quick. And because of that, I wouldn't recommend this for like a fine use application. Like, this definitely isn't a gentleman's knife. I wouldn't recommend clipping this to a suit because it just looks cheap inherently with a very worn down clip, and especially considering that this up is all you see, it doesn't really look very nice. So if you're gonna use this, I would recommend it for everyday carry, but definitely not for like a business knife or something like that. Now, in terms of comfort, it's definitely a very good handle. It does have a decent amount of contouring, and what it lacks in jimping, it definitely makes up for over here. This gripping area also makes this pocket clip extremely effective. The amount of retention on this clip is greater than any knife I have. And a lot of people think it's annoying, but I really like it because you can use it for things that most knives can't. Like, you can quite literally sleep with this knife. You can clip it just anywhere, and even when rolling around in your sleep, it's not going to slide off or anything like that. It's a very strong clip. It's got a whole lot of retention. It's very difficult to pry that up, and on top of that, it has a whole lot of grip under that, keeping it in place. So this is a very strong clip. And on top of that, this knife only weighs 1.8 ounces, so it's not a whole lot of weight for this very strong clip to hold. So this knife isn't going anywhere when it's clipped on. Now, when you look at the safeties that this knife affords, think about the stopping power going forward. It's not a whole lot. Definitely, if you're going to stab this into something hard like a tree, you'd want a little bit more stoppage on the handle, but I think this is mainly a self-defense / EDC knife. And on the back here, there is a little bit of an upslope that helps, but especially this curve right here really helps you to hold onto the knife from pulling forces, which is really nice right there. Now, this knife does have a lanyard hole. If you want to you can probably get one strand of paracord through there. I wouldn't really recommend having a lanyard on it because it would sort of throw off the balance of the knife, and it would almost be bigger than the knife when it's folded. Now, another thing about this knife is that it is only 0.37 inches thick. That is an incredible stat when you compare it with, for example, I keep using this in the video just for you guys' information. This is the Manix XL by Spyderco. This is a 0.45 inch thick handle, and this is considered a very slim handle. So this is like nothing. When you can clip this onto gym shorts, you can clip this onto a swimsuit. It's extremely lightweight, and you don't have to worry about it weighing you down or even like swinging when you're running or things like that. Alright, now I'm going to get into some macros with some different lighting, just to give you guys some really good close-ups of the knife. This is a very, very fine tip, very sharp. It's not perfectly centered on the apex, but that's simply because it's an asymmetrical edge design. Here you can see very well the stonewash and sort of the gleam of the satin lines over there, and right there. Back here you can see the laser etched logo. That's the thickness of the spine. It would take a decent amount of grinding to sharpen that back edge all the way up. There's the front edge and the serrations. The serrations are very fine. They're not very aggressive, but they're very, very sharp. It's very noticeable how sharp they are. It's very unusual in serrations. Very well done. And there is the grivery. It does look and feel a bit cheaper than G10. That's probably going to be one of the biggest downsides for a lot of guys. That's one of the most cited reasons for not getting this knife. There's the pocket clip and the quite abundant amount of wear already visible on it. And there's the steel marking 154 cm and the maker's mark Pardue design and the US patent number. Another thing you'll notice about this axis lock is that unlike a lot of other axis locks, right here there's a full indentation right in there, whereas a lot of other axis locks only have an indentation on this side, not over here. So what that does is when this is locked in place here, pulling this down will actually nudge the blade out, whereas a lot of other axis locks, it won't do that. So that's sort of a cool feature. It definitely doesn't get in the way at all if you don't know about it or if you don't want to use it. I figured that out only a few days after I got the knife, and I hadn't noticed any hindrance with it being there. So definitely an interesting added feature. Now another thing to notice is that even the grivery itself, which is inherently a very lightweight material, even that is skeletonized in there. And you can see there what I was talking about, the liners, they only come to about there, which is where that screw is. So the metal of the liners only comes to about right there. My shadow is right there. And then beyond that, all of this, other than the screws, all of this is grivery in here. The liners never actually make it to be the full width of the handle like most liners do. So calling these partial liners is even an exaggeration. It's more of like just a cage for the axis lock. Another thing that I want to mention is the speed and smoothness of this knife. This knife definitely isn't nearly as smooth as like the Contigo or the Triage or the 707 sequel or even the Adamus. I've noticed this blade is quite a lot stiffer. It puts up a little bit more of a fight, especially back here before the click. It takes a little bit to get to the point where you can swing it closed, just because there's a lot of fight to it even when opening. So you definitely want to build up a lot of pressure just right here and just fling it like that. But it does come out very fast. It is very easy to learn. So this knife is great if you're looking for an EDC knife, especially if you're one of the guys who just likes a small, lightweight EDC knife that's good quality, good steel, good lock, that's going to last you a long time. It's not going to break down. It's not going to have lock failures or issues. This is a great knife for that kind of stuff. It's a good utility knife, and I'm talking about relatively light utility, the kind of stuff that you'd see every day. Maybe doing like cardboard boxes or straps or opening packages, cutting paper, things like that. This is going to be very good for that. I would not recommend this for food prep simply because of the serrations and the fact that it's a folding knife. There's going to be a lot of issue with gunk getting inside of there, and it would be very difficult to clean. I'm not sure how difficult it would be to disassemble a grivery knife. I know it's a bit more straightforward. There's a lot more information on it with something like this that's just a slab of G10, a slab of steel. So it might be a little bit more complicated with this. I know the Omega springs in an axis lock do put up a little bit of a fight in centering it when you assemble it back yourself. And I will be covering the axis lock and the Omega springs quite thoroughly in some upcoming videos. It may not be for a little bit yet, but I do have some other Benchmade reviews coming up. Now, this knife is not going to be good for someone who's looking for like a hard use utility knife or a survival knife. It's probably not going to be good for tactical use either. It is very fast, and it is a spear point design. However, just the fact that it's so light and it doesn't even have full steel liners, I don't know if very many people would be trusting enough to put their life in the hands of this kind of knife. But if you're looking for a lightweight EDC knife that you can really carry at all times, it's sort of what Nut and Fancy refers to as a super carry, something that is so comfortable that you just never take it off even when you get in the door. This is exactly what that is. I just never even notice it on me. I sleep with it. It's with me at all times. So yeah, this is the Benchmade 530mm Pardue folding knife. It is $97.75 off Amazon and Blade HQ. A lot of crazy reviews coming up, guys. Please comment, rate, and subscribe. Stay tuned.